Hello, my beautiful soul tribe. I want to welcome you to another episode of the No Coincidences podcast. I'm your host, Cristina Witchy, and today I have a very, very special guest. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and then we'll start our interview. So, today we're going to be hanging out with Miss Lori Lambert Williams. She's an author, a professional controlled remote viewer, also known as CRV, and is highly in demand as an instructor for CRV. She's an accomplished public speaker. Lori has appeared on many popular radio and television shows and podcasts, including Coast to Coast AM, New Thinking Aloud with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove, and Astonishing Legends, and many more. Miss Williams has been researching, practicing, and studying the science of controlled remote viewing since 1996. Highly respected among both students and peers as an expert in the field of remote viewing, Lori Williams is considered by many to be the top remote viewing instructor available today. She has taught CEOs of major corporations, number one New York Times bestselling authors, celebrities, and hundreds of everyday people. A professional remote viewer herself, Lori experiences include assisting law enforcement in missing person cases, conducting professional sessions for corporations, working on archaeological mysteries, and providing personal life path sessions for individuals. Lori has presented workshops on remote viewing all over the world, and Lori's remote viewing company, now known as Intuitive Specialist, opened in 1999. You can reach Lori at intuitivespecialists.com. And I am so excited and honored to be doing an interview with Lori today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring her up. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for having me on. I love the beginning of your podcast. It was gorgeous. All the waterfalls and the ocean and the crystals is so beautiful.
Thank you so much. Here on the No Coincidences podcast, I tell everybody there are no coincidences in life. All things go back to the universe, they go back to source, and everything aligns at the exact right time. And I do feel like that goes not only in the spiritual realm, but even for the everyday things that we do. So
That's
I
good.
want to jump right into this. Can you tell us how you first got involved with remote viewing and what drew you to this field over other things you could have done?
That's a great question. I had never heard of remote viewing, like many people, until I was attending a conference on post-traumatic stress disorder in refugees in Denver, Colorado, at the Spring Institute. And main speaker, this was like a 3-day event, and the main speaker turned out to be a recently retired military colonel. And I loved his talks. He was a psychologist and he gave these fascinating conversations. And the first night after the day of watching, I dreamt about this guy, and I dreamt that I was telling him that I had just met my very first colonel a few days earlier in Amarillo, Texas. And so suddenly I'm like, wow, what a coincidence. I
Right.
met I met two colonels, my very first two colonels in the world in the same week. And the next morning I got to the conference early and he was there, and we were both early. So no coincidences. We were both standing out there and waiting for the ballroom doors to get unlocked. And so I just kind of shyly looked at him, and I was in my 30s at the time, so I was much younger, but I shyly looked at him and I said, actually, I had a dream about you last night. And he said, really? What did you dream? And I said, well, I just met this colonel in Amarillo and I dreamt I was telling you about this colonel. And he said, oh, what branch of the military was this colonel in? And I said, I think he was in military intelligence. He goes, oh, interesting. I was in military intelligence. And just as he said that, the cover of a book that I had just seen at the new on the new arrivals shelf at the bookstore flashed in my mind, and I just blurted out, "Have you seen that new book?" He said, "What new book?" I said, "It has something to do with psychics in the military. It's turquoise and black." And he said, "Oh, are you talking about Psychic Warrior by David Morehouse?" I said, "I am. That's the book." He said, "It's interesting you're asking me about that book because I'm a main character in that book." And I said,
Oh,
"You are?" And he said, "Yeah, I was a psychologist who had to vet the soldiers going into that program for 20 years."
oh my gosh.
So I was, I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't read the book. So as I was, and then because I blurted out about the book, he was very intrigued and he started asking me all these questions. And he said, "Are you artistic? Do you remember maps easily? Do you remember numbers easily?" He just started asking me these questions, and I was kind of backing away, you know, getting a little
Yeah.
nervous. And he said, "Wait, wait, before you go home," he said, "when you get home," excuse me, I have a little frog in my throat. "When you get home, look up controlled remote viewing." So I didn't forget that. I made a real mental note of it. When I got home,
Yeah.
I got on the new internet because the internet wasn't very old back then. This was 1995 or 1996. I got on the internet and looked up controlled remote viewing on Google, and up pops this web page. It says, "What is CRV?"
Hmm.
And the web page was built by Lynn Buchanan, who had been a trainer in the military unit, the
Mhm.
psychic spying unit. And so with great trepidation, I sent Lynn Buchanan an email because I read the page, and as I read the page, it was like, oh, this is it, and I just knew this was what I'd been searching for. Because when I was a little girl, I had a near death experience, and I died and was revived. And I don't remember the experience actually, but I remember is the aftermath of the experience. I remember laying in bed and just feeling so loved by the universe, surrounded by
Yep.
universal love, and hearing amazing music in my head all the time. That
Right.
that was just so beautiful. And then I always had psychic experiences. I saw ghosts and had angels come to me at night in my dreams, taking me off to classrooms, what I thought were angels, and we could speak telepathically. And there were all these really interesting things that happened in my life. I remember my grandfather had called, and I could hear his voice in my head. My mom was on the phone with him, and I couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but I could hear it in my head. And then she got off the phone and she told my dad everything he had said, and I was thinking, "That's everything I heard in my head."
Yeah.
So all these weird things would happen to me all the time, and it gave my mom the heebie-jeebies. She was she didn't know what to do with it, but then I ended up going into this missionary group. I met them right after I turned 14, and they were the Jesus people of the day. And
Mhm.
nowadays it's pretty much considered a cult, but I went into this group at that very tender age, and then, it's like this kind of stuff could be considered of the devil, so you
Right.
had, you had to be careful.
Right.
And it was a fine line you're walking, whether you're hearing the voice of the Lord or you're hearing the voice of the devil, so I was having to be pretty careful, and I was kind of always a little unsure, like, wait, was it okay that I'm like this, or am I
Yeah.
weird? And so I was really, after I left that group and I was in back in the States, and I called a wrong number and first got this job as a social worker with the state of Texas, worked there 5 years, and then got this amazing job resettling refugees. And it was the same month that I got the job resettling refugees that I got sent to Denver for this conference. So I
Wow.
so I had this huge change in my life, both in my career and
Yeah.
in discovering CRV. And CRV was what I had been looking for to really reconcile this kind of binary Christian belief system
Right.
with these experiences I'd been having all my life that I had really been afraid to look
Mhm.
at and explore. And
Yeah.
so that's how, so when I met Lynn Buchanan was the best guy out there that could have taught me. I'm not saying, that other teachers aren't good. I'm
Right.
just saying that for me personally, because I was coming from this trepidatious, kind of scared, afraid to displease God place, and Lynn
Right.
had a background as a Methodist minister,
Oh, wow.
and he had been raised a Baptist,
Right.
so
Okay. Oh.
yeah, so he was the perfect guy for me because he was very gentle and very soft-spoken and non-aggressive. He was never harsh or militaristic with me in any way,
Right.
and so he was the perfect teacher for me, and, took me under his wing, and his wife became, like, my best friend in the whole world.
I
Even
love
though
that.
Yeah, even though I it was coincidence, again, since your podcast is called No Coincidences, I suddenly am using the word a lot, like I never use it,
Right.
but now anyway, right after I looked at his website and I sent him an email, I ended up getting sent to, to the Washington, DC area, and to, I'm trying to think of what is the state that's right there with Washington? Suddenly I'm having a mental block. Maryland,
There's
Maryland.
Virginia yeah.
It was Maryland. So I was sent to Maryland for a conference, another conference, like a week later, and Lynn said, "Oh, I live in Maryland, and just you could come, and I was stuck there for over a weekend after my conference ended. I got stuck, so I called him, and he had this most grandfatherly, wonderful voice, very I felt very safe. And he said, "Well, why don't you rent a car and come to our home?" And he invited me over. So I thought, okay, if I can find a car for $24 for tomorrow, I'll know I'm supposed to go. I pick up the Hertz phone in the lobby and they're like, "We have a car for 24, whatever it was." And so I rented the car. I got to Lynn's house. I stayed there 5 hours. I think I really overstayed my welcome now that I look back, but I was there for 5 hours, and his wife never said a word. She was kind of off in the corner. She's kind of a shy person, but she was off working behind her laptop. So I just talked with Lynn the whole time. And then years later, Lynn was telling the story of because somebody said, "How did you meet Lori?" And he was telling the story to the student, and it totally matched my memory completely. Up until he said, "Then when she left, my wife turned to me and she said, 'Lynn, you've got to stop inviting these crazy people here.'" and, and I thought, and at the time I heard this, she and I were like best friends. And I said, "What?" She thought I was crazy. And he said, "You looked like you were 24. And you were talking about having 7 kids and a grandbaby." And we thought, this poor girl and her imaginary family. And so and so I was actually 39 when I met him, but I just looked younger. Now I'm going
Right.
on 68. But
You still look much younger.
thank you. I think it's the camera. I
I
because
think
when I
so
look
too. Because
Yeah.
Imma tell you what, I'm about to turn 40 next month, and I mean, I think I look really nice on these cameras for some reason. I'm like, "This
Yeah.
is not what I see in the mirror."
I know when I get up in the morning, I'm like, "Man, baby, you're getting old,"
I'm like,
getting a
"Have you
little
seen that monster that's looking back at me lately?"
yeah, so I'm like,
Well,
"Whew," anyway, but yeah, the camera's kind.
I love the beginning of your journey. It leads into so many things that are, like, directly in my realm. So, my audience already knows I'm a psychic medium. I'm very, very intuitive. I'm a healer. And you mentioned that when you were younger, coming into your intuition, and that your mom didn't understand what to do with it. So we kind of have a similar backstory. My mom grew up in a very religious home, and her, I want to make sure I get this right, her mother and her grandmother liked to practice the dark side of things. And so it scared
Mm,
my mom away from things of intuition and whatnot. And so she never did anything with it. And, when I would say things as a child, like about deja vu or dreams coming true or, things of this nature, she would just brush it off like it wasn't a big thing. And then as I became older and I've become more into it, I want to say it was, gosh, probably about 6 months to a year ago, she started seeing me pop up on social media and started seeing what I was doing and how I'm helping people. And she was like, "Do you think you could maybe teach me some of this?"
Wow.
And it was just so almost like a shell shock to me because I was like, whoa, usually it's the other way around, right? It's the parent teaching the child. And now I get to have the role reverse. And it's so awesome. She's learning so much. And I love that she's seeing that what she grew up with isn't the only side of it. Was your mom ever able to come to accept your abilities?
Well, my mom wasn't well, she was raised Catholic, but she was
Mm,
never religious, and by the time I came along, in fact, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, I was just a little kid, and we were living in the Chicago area, and we went to this huge cathedral because my mother said to my father, "I want to light a candle for John F. Kennedy." So he took her to the cathedral, even though they were not practicing any religion at all. He took her to the cathedral to light a candle, and they were holding my hand, and I was walking up the aisle, and they said I suddenly said in a very loud voice, and everyone in the cathedral were praying for John F. Kennedy, and it was very quiet and somber. And suddenly, in a very loud voice, I said, "Hey, who's that guy up there on the cross?" And so they were horrified and horribly embarrassed. And my father looked at my mother and said, "I think we need to teach her something about religion." But I was not raised in a religious thing at all. So when I met
right.
this cult, they were not happy, with that at all because
Mm-hmm.
suddenly and back then cults. This was 1971. Cults were not really a known thing. It wasn't
Right.
like,
Yeah.
oh no, she's getting into a cult. It was just sort of like my mother would say, "Hey, you got to watch out. Kooks join groups like this." That was the extent of her warning. But but at the same time, they were kind of worried about being too restrictive, and they just didn't. It's parenting. I heard something the other day that really struck me because I've got 9 kids. I gave birth to 7, and I have 2 wonderful stepdaughters. We have 22 grandkids and a great granddaughter.
Oh, wow. You got a big
And I
family.
was watching, yeah, it is a big family. I was watching a thing with Nick Polizzi about the
Hmm.
shamans in the jungle and the plant medicine and people going with all these diseases and getting healed. And he, right before he was going to make the documentary, and he said to the shaman, "I just found out my wife is pregnant. I'm going to be a dad." And the shaman looked at him and said, "Are you ready for that?" And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Parenting is the strongest medicine." And I thought,
Hmm.
yes, oh my gosh, yes, that is so true. It is the toughest gig of any gig you could possibly have. Parenting
It
is really,
is.
it's a hard, and because, like when something like what I did to my parents, it's like, what do you do? How do you handle it?
Yeah.
If I do this, this might happen. If I do that, that might happen. How do I handle it? And I feel bad for my parents now because I realize how tough it was for them to
Right.
know what way to go. And I know they did the best they could. They did
Right.
the best with the knowledge they had at the time.
I love that you just said that because that is part of what I teach people. When they come to me and they go, I have this inner child trauma and my parents did this and my parents did that. And I like to tell people, I say exactly the way you just said it too. I tell them, I say, look, you have to heal for yourself. You have to forgive for yourself because your parents did the best that they could with the knowledge of what they had and with what they had physically in order to raise you. Because some people, maybe they grew up in a home that was of lesser monetary or whatever. But I tell them, I'm like, your parents always did the best with the knowledge and the abilities. And so the fact that you just said that, I mean, like you said, no coincidences, right? Like it
It's so
keeps popping
true.
up.
I was just talking to my husband about this. He's my best friend in the world, and he's such a great partner. And I was saying how my okay, my I have a daughter who married a guy who was kind of a ne'er do well. He
Hmm.
never wanted to work and never did a good job taking care of the kids, or he was just kind of a layabout and played video games all the time, and nobody liked him because nobody had any respect for him. And
Right.
one night I dreamt that this angel came to me and said, "I want to show you who this guy really is."
Hmm.
And he showed me his spirit, and he was this like amazing warrior spirit who chose to come and play this difficult role in order to create the lessons that everyone who were affected by him
Right.
had chosen to take on in
Right.
this lifetime. And I was so amazed by that because I was like, wow,
Right.
it so often we don't know. I remember reading what was it called? Embraced by the Light by Betty Eadie. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
ever heard of it, but
I
she
haven't,
wrote
but I'll look it up.
she had an amazing near-death experience, and while she was dead, she had 2 near-death experiences in her life, and then the second one, this angel was flying with her, and they were flying in this city, and he said, "What do you see down there?" And she said, "I see a drunk lying in his wallow." And she was disgusted by this drunken
Right.
guy just laying in the gutter. And she saw this man in a suit walk by the drunk and give the drunk some money and go into the building. And so the angel explains to her that the drunk's role in life is to be the drunk so that he affects all these people, and that this one lawyer goes by him every day on his way to work and gives him money every morning, and
Mhm.
that the way that this drunk affects the lawyer really affects the lawyer's life in a really good positive learning lesson way. And so I was saying, we don't know. I mean, we thought this
Right.
guy that my daughter married was a jerk, but at the same time, that was his role. He came down to play a jerk.
Right.
And so it was kind of an interesting, it's so interesting. Things are not the way we see. I had this experience once, Christina, where um, I used to have these experiences where these beings would come and take me out of my body, and I'd get whisked out into the
Hmm.
universe. And so I got whisked out, and I watched the earth kind of get really small. And
Mhm.
then as we flew back really fast, the earth gets big again. And suddenly the arms around me let go, and I'm falling. And I'm
Uh-oh.
falling towards this very thick forest, and I can see the treetops getting closer and closer as I'm falling. And then suddenly I'm falling upwards, and the treetops are above me in the sky. And I hear this voice say, "Reality is not what you think it is."
Mm.
I promise there were no drugs involved. And so and I was like, "Wow," I feel as if that's so there's no more true statement than that
Right.
reality is not what we think it is. And so everything has an appearance of certain things, and we look at that so closely, we sometimes are like, have our eyes right up against a tapestry, but we don't all we can see are the threads, we don't see the real picture, and
Right.
how vitally important our role here is
Yeah.
in the school that we're in right now.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Look, I feel like you and we could like become besties after this because you're hitting on everything that I swear this is like stuff that I go through with people every week. You just said the school, and you're talking about, people have certain roles here. And this is something that I tell people all the time. If you see on my little scrolly bar down there somewhere, it says nothing happens to you, it happens for you. And that is 100% my philosophy in life. And with that, I like to tell people that you sign a soul contract. And I know not everybody believes in a soul contract, but I tell them, I'm like, maybe you decide with God or the higher power, whatever you want to call him, uh, that I'm going to have 10 good things happen in my life and I'm going to have 23 bad things happen in my life, but it's going to elevate my soul. So I'm going to sign this contract, right? Hence where like the drunk guy comes in.
Mhm.
Drunk guy was like, what in the world, but he helped somebody. So it's like a timeline, right? Like God drops these pinpoints on your timeline of your soul contract, and you go throughout life experiencing the good and the bad. But in all actual reality, these things were meant for your soul while you're in this school of earth in order for your soul to elevate. And it's what you do with these lessons and following your contract as to how your life goes, because we do still have free will. We can choose to deter, but then that's where karmic life cycles come in. So,
Yeah, so true. It's so true, and I think that, it's interesting because we one reason I'm so passionate about controlled remote viewing and all the other types of remote viewing. There's a lot of different types of remote viewing. It's kind of like saying martial arts. There's jujitsu and taekwondo and karate, and so
right,
remote viewing is kind of a overall term. But controlled remote viewing is such a great tool because anybody can use it. So it's even made for the very, very left brain analytical people and the psychic people. As I have a lot of psychic mediums who take my courses, and excuse me. And so the reason I'm so passionate about it is because, especially today, when a lot of people get confused and there's a lot of disharmony. I mean, I think we're kind of going through a cosmic thing right now,
Mhm.
for which I lack the appropriate language. But we're definitely going through some very strong changes. And
Yeah,
when you look at everything that's happening, and there's discord and there's disharmony and there's anger and there's confusion and fear, and we always fear that which we don't understand. And
exactly.
then there's all the climactic stuff going on and political stuff. And so when you know all that is happening, it can be really easy to just lose your center,
Yep.
lose your ground. And with controlled remote viewing, you can set aside a lot of your emotions and get answers. And
Right.
if you can't get them for yourself because you're too emotionally vested in order to get the answer, you can, if in a community of remote viewers, you can ask, hey, would you like to trade sessions with me? I'll do one for you, you do one for me. And then you can be given a session that you're completely blind to the target. You don't know what you're viewing.
Right.
And that gives you a lot more pure answers.
Right.
So that's one reason I find it so wonderful, because I feel like it's a way to get pure answers, without YouTube, without the news media
Right.
interfering. Because people are
Right.
like, oh, there's the fake media, fake news. And then I go on Facebook, and there is so much disinformation on Facebook. Then you go on
Mhm.
YouTube, and there is so much disinformation on YouTube. And
Mhm.
then people are talking about CNN and MSN and Fox News and everything. And there's so much disinformation. Well, you can't believe YouTube and Facebook either, guys. You can't
Right.
believe Reddit. You can't believe any of them, because they can put so much information. And now they've got the Russians and the Chinese inserting stuff and trying to influence us.
Right.
Because if they can bring down this behemoth, which is the United States,
Mhm.
wow, that's that fish is going to sink the boat when they pull that one in. So I feel like our biggest, I call CRV the survival skill of the future, except the future's here. So I
Right.
used to call it the skill of the future, but now it's the survival skill of now, because we need a pure source of information. And
Yeah.
what's purer than the source itself, right? Just
Exactly.
connecting to your higher self and getting the answers that you need. So
Right.
that's why I'm so enthusiastic about it, even after all these years since 1996.
Yeah.
It's been really into it.
So you mentioned that your preferred method is controlled remote viewing. Can you explain for the audience exactly what controlled remote viewing is?
Yes, controlled remote viewing is a written methodology that was developed for U.S. military intelligence by physicists at Stanford Research Institute and a man named Ingo Swann. And they created it because they found out that the Russians had a psychic spying program. So they said, okay, well, if they got one, we got to have one. But how can we do it? So they said, okay, first of all, we've got to study brain science, which is one reason that sets CRV apart from Madame Minerva in the Gypsy Tent. And please understand that I have nothing against Madame Minerva in the Gypsy Tent. She's my alter ego. My kids came up with Madame Minerva for me. But what sets CRVers apart from Madame Minerva and the Gypsy Tent is the brain science section of this, and the fact
Right.
that you can sit at a table with your eyes open on a piece of paper, and you're putting things on the paper. Now, the biggest issue is that we have the right brain, which is the psychic side of our brains. We have the left brain, which is the analytical side, right?
Mhm.
And so they work together. But then we also have the conscious mind and the subconscious mind.
Right.
So, using the knowledge that they had about brain science, they actually developed this written method that is designed to separate imagination from true psychic perceptions.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is that when they came up with this, they had Stanford Research Institute on the West Coast, and eventually they opened Fort Meade in Maryland, and they
Mhm.
had those guys on the East Coast. So what they had was on the West Coast was the research arm, and then they had the actual applications arm on the East
On the East
Coast.
Coast, right.
And so when they were doing all this and researching, do you know that with 20 years of research into ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, and all these things, they came up with more proof that all of this really is true and really does exist than the FDA has, proving that aspirin is effective as a pain reliever. So So this is really a very fascinating science. And my dad, who was a total skeptic about everything,
Yeah,
when
I've
I
got one of
got
those.
it, yeah, when I he majored in debate in school, and, uh, and so, and when I got into the cult, I'd try to talk to him, I'd say, "Well, daddy, the Bible says," he'd say, "Don't talk to me about the Bible's just a book."
Mhm.
But, that's the kind of guy he was. But when I came home and told him about remote viewing, he was fascinated. If he had not been dying of cancer by that point, he would have jumped right in both feet to study it. And my mom would sometimes make fun of it. She'd say, "Well, Lori and her spook show." And he'd say, "Now, Kathy, don't make fun of this. This is the real thing. This was developed by the US military." Now, he didn't want her dissing the military. So
Right.
but you asked about my mom and did she ever come to accept it? She really believed in me. And I would tell her, I would come home and say, "Oh, mom, listen to what just happened." Or I'd call her and say, "Oh, listen to this." Because, really interesting things happened a lot. And especially along the lines of mediumship. Excuse me, my laptop's kind of collapsing here. Especially along the lines of mediumship. And when I would tell her things, she would go, "Oh my God, Lori, you're so spooky. How can you even live with yourself?" So she found these things to be a little bit spooky, but she herself had a lot of psychic experiences and ghostly experiences. And so it's just that without developing these things, even if you have natural talent and stuff happens all the time to you, without developing it so that you can have control over it and use it on demand, it's just the tail wagging the dog, right?
That's right.
So it's really, I think getting training and learning to develop it is huge. And I have some students who are professional psychics and very successful. I have one student who she took my courses 2 times each, has had her own TV show twice and is very
Oh, wow.
successful. And I said, "Why would you bother with CRV when you were obviously successful before you ever heard of it?" And she
Right.
said, "Oh, it has increased my psychic ability by 400%." And she
Yeah,
said, "Plus, it's taught me how to report my findings and get greater detail, and it also taught me that I don't have to have perfect conditions and have meditated first and all these things, and I could still get things just, on
right.
demand." And so she's worked with the FBI and helped to solve a lot of missing person cases and things like that. So that's her specialty.
Yeah,
But it's really helpful because it's a discipline, really.
right.
CRV is a discipline. So there's associative remote viewing, which is a totally different type of remote viewing for getting quick answers by associating something that's very easy to pick up on psychically, like colors and textures and smells and
Right.
things, with something very difficult like numbers and letters.
Mhm.
Like how tall was the guy that robbed the 7-Eleven,
Right.
So that's associative remote viewing. Controlled remote viewing, again, is a written structure that helps you separate true psychic perceptions from imagination. And then extended remote viewing is done in a hypnagogic state where it's the kind of remote viewing that most people think of when they think of remote viewing, where kind of
Right.
close your eyes and tell me what you see type of remote viewing.
Yeah. I love that you're bringing it up this way because so as a psychic, I get kind of what you're talking about, right? Like somebody might start talking to me and then all of a sudden I get a color that comes through or a number that comes through or I might even see the image that they're seeing and then I have to, as a psychic, be able to differentiate, is this my thought or is this their thought, right? Is this something that
Hmm.
they experienced or is this something that I'm just making up because I'm hearing a story? And so when you're sitting here saying, well, we can use CRV because as a psychic, we know I use more of the right side of my brain. And with CRV, I'm able to learn to pick up the pen and jot it and use that left side of my brain. And with that, what do you think really I mean, I know we kind of just dabbled on what distinguishes CRV from psychic, but you also mentioned that you've had psychics that take your course. How do you think that having these psychic abilities and being able to see things and then transmuting it into an actual logical method, how much of a difference do you think that makes for people?
think it's huge because I have students who tell me, I have one student and I asked him, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing a book." I've now written a couple of books, but at the time I was thinking about writing my first book. And I said, if you could read a book about CRV that told you something you had never heard before, what would be the most helpful thing for you to learn? Because now he had taken my courses and he said, "Oh man," he said, "I wish somebody had told me that you don't have to have seen angels or ghosts or have any kind of psychic experience because I have had zero psychic experiences in my life, zero." He said, "So I thought I couldn't take the course because I thought only people who were psychic could take it." But
Mm,
then he took the course and he became a really great remote viewer. And so he said, "I wish somebody had told me that because I would have started taking the course years ago if I'd known."
right,
And so what I love about CRV is that it really helps anybody from, regardless of their psychic ability, their natural psychic ability.
right,
But based on your question, I mean, someone who has a lot of natural ability, which I had coming
right,
into this, I had a lot of natural ability, but I also had a lot of fear.
right,
And, I was afraid of my ability. Like, is my ability good? Is it evil? Should I use it? Should I not use it? Could I get demon possessed? I
right.
really had those kinds of questions. And
Yeah,
people knowing me now, I find it hard to believe that I could have ever been like that. But it's because this cult really instilled a lot of fear about
right.
displeasing God.
And
So
society does this, well, and not now. I mean, they still do a little bit, but society also, they attribute to that. For the longest time, people who did things like what we do, it was taboo.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you look historically, I mean, witches were burned at the stake, I mean,
Right.
there was a lot, there's a verse in the Bible that says, "Suffer not a witch to live," and anybody who had psychic ability was considered to be a witch. But, Christina, one thing I have a blog on my website at intuitivespecialist.com. And I don't know how many people read the blog, but there are so many good articles in there because I've been writing the blog now for many, many years. But one of the articles I wrote is called "How to Speak to a Devout Christian About CRV." And the reason I wrote it was because I had some students who were devout Christians and they had family who were devout Christians who were questioning their getting into CRV. Like, is that a good thing? But one of the things that I like to point out to people is that, I mean, do you consider your eyesight evil? And, they'll say, "Of course not. My eyesight's a gift of God, right?" Yeah, but
Right.
what if you use your eyes to look at porn? Does that make it evil? No.
Mm,
That doesn't make your eyesight evil. It's maybe it's not a good thing to look at porn, but I don't consider looking at using my eyes as an evil thing. Okay. So your eyesight's not evil. Your ability to hear is not evil. Those are senses, God-given senses.
right.
So why would anyone not think of the ability to have extrasensory perception
Right.
as, why would people think of that? That's a God-given gift, and it is definitely not evil because it's another sense that
Right.
everybody has. And I think the only reason that it is questioned is because those in, and I don't mean those in power like presidents or governors or whatever. I mean people in general consider it scary. I had a job for many years working at a nonprofit, and psychic stuff would just pop out. You just can't help it, right?
Yes.
It just kind of oozes from your pores. And so, like, for example, I had a lady who came in one day. She was sitting in my office. She had just arrived from Senegal or Liberia or someplace. She was a refugee. And she sat down and she said, "I want you to get me a job at the meat factory." And I said, "No, but you sew." I'd never met this lady, had never spoken to her. I said, "No, but you sew." And she went, "Oh, how did you know that?" And so I'm thinking, "Oops." I'm thinking, "Oops,
I
did
did it
that
again.
say that with my out loud voice?" And I said, "Do you sew?" She said, "Yes, sewing has been my whole life. I've been a seamstress and a tailor, and I've taught sewing." She said, "But how did you know that?" And I said, "Well, when you walked in, I saw you sitting behind a sewing machine in my mind." And, and so she was kind of freaked out, by
Yeah.
that. And then another day I was getting out of the elevator and this woman that worked in my office, I didn't know her very well, but she was coming in as I was getting off or well, vice versa, I don't remember. But when I saw her, I went, "Oh my gosh, I just had a dream about you. And in the dream, you were asking me if you could come into my bedroom and pray, and if I would pray with you because your dog was going into surgery and you were so worried about him." And she said, "My dog is going into surgery and I am really worried about him." And so and then one morning I came in and I was sitting in my boss's office because he was first in command. I was right below him, second in command at this agency. And I said, "Oh man, I had this hilarious dream in which some guy named Daniel Martinez came in to see you, and he was some kind of city official, and he wanted you to help his mother." And right then, his secretary walks in and goes, "George, there's a man named Daniel Martinez here to see you." And he looks at me, freaked out, and he goes, "You're coming with me." So he grabs my hand and we go, and the guy goes, "Yes, I'm a city councilman, and I was wondering if you would be willing to have a Mexican consulate in this building." And he looks at me and I look at him and I'm like, "The motherland." He goes, "The motherland." So these things would happen all the time. And one day this guy that worked in one of part of the agency came in and he and I were supposed to work on a letter together. And after
Mhm.
a few minutes, I went, "Oh my gosh, Jody, I'm so sorry. We're supposed to be writing this together, and I think I just sort of took off without you, and I'm writing the letter without you." He looked at me and he goes, "You're writing everything I'm thinking." He was like freaked out, and he jumped up and he ran out of my office, and he runs next door into my boss's office, and he's like, "She's writing everything I'm thinking, my exact thoughts." And he goes, "I know. I'm so afraid to have an office next to her. I'm afraid she my thoughts." He said, "I feel like I need an aluminum hat." And, and these things would happen all the time. So when this kind of thing happens, people are afraid of you because they're
Yes.
afraid you will know their secrets.
Yes.
So governments were afraid of remote viewers because if remote viewers can actually do this, then there are no secrets. And
Right.
that's why it behooves churches and governments and
Mhm.
anybody who wants to have power over the people to make this seem like an evil thing. Because
Yeah,
if it's evil, then everybody stays away from it and we won't have anybody remote view.
exactly. When you say about how like they like to try to make it evil, I look at with my own social media journey, like I've had things go viral and then I've had things that only get 50, 55 views. And I look at the ones that get the 50 or 55 views and it's where I'm like, "Hey, there's a spiritual warfare happening," and I start going into things that are happening on the spiritual aspect and it's things that I see in my third eye, right? Like when you were just talking about the story, right before you said, "Oh, he was talking about he needed an aluminum hat." I'm like, "Well, I'm seeing this guy wearing an aluminum foil thing on his head. Like that's great." And then you're like, "Yeah, he actually said it." And I'm like, "Yep." That's just it's just one of those abilities that once you're so in tune with it, you really can't make it not happen. My family, they'll always ask me, they're like, "Why do you like going to the grocery store real late at night?" And I'm like, "Well, it's because I don't have to walk around a store full of people and hear all their thoughts and see all the things that they're seeing. I don't want that." So it's
Mhm.
easier for me to stay a little bit more in solitude. But how do you ensure that with your remote viewing that the sessions remain controlled instead of going for more of a mental influence as would be with the psychic ability?
Well, because here's the thing. CRV is not perfect, right? So just like the baby has to start crawling before the baby walks, right?
Right.
We've noticed because now I've taught thousands of students and I've worked very closely with a lot of students, and we have a 3-year professional certification program now where we take somebody from rank beginner all the way through world class remote viewers. And we've
Mhm.
learned that in this process, it's just like a baby in that you expect at a certain time that the baby's going to hit certain milestones, and if the
Right.
baby is not crawling at a certain age or not walking by a certain point, we know we should probably get things checked out. Do you know I didn't
Right.
start walking till I was 2, and neighbors would come over and say, "There's something wrong with that kid, she should be walking by now." My mom was going, "Oh, no, she's just lazy, she'll walk when she's ready." And I guess she was right, but 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 if it had been my child, I would have been like, "Something's really wrong with this kid. They should be walking. 2 years old is too late to not be walking." So, and my mom tells me that story. I don't know. I think maybe her ages might have been a little. I can't believe that I didn't walk till I was 2. But anyway, the thing though is that we've seen certain milestones that viewers hit. So when a new person walks in to start taking the course, and let's say they think they don't have any psychic ability, they've never done anything psychic. So they're thinking that they're going to have an image in their mind of whatever's in the envelope or whatever the target is, and then when we reveal it to them, it'll be exactly what they saw in their head. And it never is. It's never what they're seeing in their head. So what's interesting, so then they go, "Oh, no, this doesn't work at all." That's why I put out my free course. You mentioned that you took the free course.
Yes.
When I first came up with this idea to put out a free course, and it was kinda scary, Christina, because as you know, doing what you do, it's
Mhm.
kinda like they don't start shooting at you till you climb out of the foxhole, right? So
Right.
so when you're in the foxhole, you're nice and safe, but then once you lift your head up, that's when you get shot at. So I thought, wow, if
Mhm.
I put out a free course, I'm really going public with this, and
Yeah.
before that, it was kind of word of mouth. I teach, 4 people a month or whatever. All of a sudden, I said, I'm going to put out a free course. And the guy who was going to be the person who did the tech part of putting the course out, he goes, "This course is a real course. It's not just, it's this worth. I'm you should you, most of my clients put out like a one-page PDF as a free
Right.
thing." I said,
Right.
"This is a 4-part course. It's like an
Right.
8-hour thing." He goes,
Yeah.
"This you could make money from this." I said, "No, this has to go out and it has to be free because people have to experience this for
Right.
themselves to believe it. Otherwise, it's like going to see a magician. You'll see it and you go, "Oh, that's cool," but you don't think you could do it. But when you can do it and you do it yourself, you're not tricking yourself. And so
Right.
that was my passion. I was like, this has to go out and it has to be free. So he, it was my deal. So he said, okay, and we had 4,300 people sign up to take that first one because we were going to have it on a certain date, right? So
Oh,
it's going to be on
wow.
this date. So we had 4,300 people sign up and they said, well, okay, expect 20% of those people. If you get 20% of those 4,300 to actually watch the course and take it, you're doing really good. We had 80% watch it.
That's amazing.
And yeah, it was really phenomenal. And so I got flooded with emails, people saying, oh my God, this has changed my life. It
Yeah.
wasn't the course that changed their life, it was what they did and how
Right.
successful they were. But here's the key, it's not because they saw the picture in their head and the picture was what they actually remote viewed. It was that they described it accurately. So
Mhm.
our mantra, the right brain describes, the left brain names. So our
Right.
mantra is describe, don't identify, because that's where people always go off is they name stuff. So I was one day my son came to visit me and he said, "Hey mom, there's a new TV show." This was many years ago, but I think it's called Psychic Detectives or something. Let's watch it together.
Mhm.
So we pull it up and we start watching the Psychic Detective show and they're looking for this murderer and the medium says, "Oh, the murderer has a job, a career in which the murderer is involved with something mechanical that revolves like a merry-go-round." Okay, so she said, "Like a merry-go-round,"
Right.
and the detectives go checking all the carnivals out. Turns out the murderer drove a cement truck, which is a mechanical thing that
And
revolves,
it goes
right?
down, right.
But the minute she attached a noun to it, merry-go-round,
Yep.
it sent them off in the wrong direction. So it's like if I said, "Hey, Christina, I have something in this envelope. I want you to describe it." And you said, "It's red, smooth, and shiny. I bet it's an apple." So red, smooth, and shiny comes from the right brain. Apple comes from the left brain. You pull the picture out and it's a fire engine, which is
Mhm.
red, smooth, and shiny. You describe the picture accurately. But most new viewers will go, oh, dang, it's not what I saw in my head because I saw an apple and this is a fire engine. And they'll be very disappointed. But then I say, yeah, but look what you described. You said
Right.
it's red, smooth, and shiny, so you described it accurately.
Right.
So oftentimes viewers describe things very accurately and they'll be disappointed when they see the picture because the picture's not the picture in their head, but it is exactly what they described.
Yeah. You
So
know,
that's key.
you mentioned that, and I'm going to say from using more of my intuition, I understand that completely. It's like my guides put an image in my head that I can relate with, right? Or if they show me something, it's something that the person that I'm giving a reading to can relate to. And I have to sit there and go, look, I don't know if this is for you or me, but I was just shown a purple sweater or, whatever. And then the person will have to sit there and think about it. Or I tell people when I do readings on them, I say, write this down, write down the things that I'm telling you because it might not resonate right now, but it might resonate in the future, like somewhere in the near future, because I don't get to choose if they show me past, present, or future. I just get what they give me. So, when you're saying this, like this really makes it to where you can take your psychic mediumship to the next level and you can actually identify and go and look at what's there and be able to to give them that accuracy. Can we're getting kind of close to the time that we're going to be finished, but is there any way I could get you to maybe walk us through like a little CRV process before we end the show?
Yeah, it's what I would really suggest is if you're able to put up the link to the free class, because then
Yeah.
people really get it, it's free. Doesn't
Yeah.
cost you anything. People always go, "Oh, I bet it's not free. It's going to be a big sales pitch or whatever."
Oh
I
no, guys, it's
ignore
100% free. I've done it.
it, and it's free, and it's not a sales pitch. It's totally
It's
not a
not.
sales pitch.
You
Um,
get 4 days worth of emails and you sit and do your hour or two with the
and you
emails and
yeah, each email has a link to a video, and you watch the
right.
video, and there's homework, and I mean, it's a real class.
Yeah.
And so it's really good. It's not, I mean, I filmed it myself, so that part's maybe not the greatest, but the thing is that's been out since 2019, so it's been out there for 5 years, and I still get letters all the time, and people are like, "That's amazing. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I did it." So that's the point of it all is, and I teach a ton of stuff because there's a lot of detail. But if you just a quick run through, one of the things that we do in a CRV session is, if I have a target for you, let's say I have a photograph that I want you
Mhm.
to remove you, and you don't close your eyes, you don't go off into a trance or anything. You've got paper and you've got a pen, and the first thing we do is we kind of clear the decks because, if you're thinking about that you forgot to pay your gas bill and you got to go down and pay it, and the dog's going to want out, and you had that argument with so and so yesterday, and you're really afraid you might not be able to do this. Everybody can do it but me. Watch me be the first person who can't do it. And all these different things come up, right? So the first thing we do is clear those things away. And so I teach you a 3-step method that helps you clear that away. And I've had so many students tell me that that alone was worth learning because they've one lady who gambles for a living, she said, "Oh my gosh, learning that set aside thing totally helped me to be able to be completely emotionless when I'm gambling, when I'm playing poker, because I
Wow.
used to get all emotional. Now I can just
Yeah.
set all my emotions aside." And another lady said, "Oh, this really helped my kids' grades because they set aside their test anxiety." So there's 3 steps to how you set all this stuff aside, and it's even a blog on my website. I have a ton of free stuff on my website. Besides that free class, there's a tab that says free stuff, and there's all kinds of really goodies in there. I have a free class called Secrets of the Ancients that teaches you how to use pendulums to get answers. And there's just so many free things. Plus the blogs. The blogs teach you all
Yeah.
kinds of lots of free classes in the blogs, like how to find your perfect location and all these different things. So if they just dive in, and there's even a little thing that says start here that teaches you how to go through the website if you want, and we're in the midst of redesigning the website, so we're going to even make it a lot more user friendly, but because
Mhm.
it's so full now, people go, "Oh my gosh, I'm a little overwhelmed, there's so much goodies." So we have it, we're going to reorganize it and make it so much easier to navigate, but there's goodies there, and they can learn how to do that. So you set aside all your stuff, and then when you're ready to start remote viewing, it's a physical discipline, it's a martial art. So when you're ready to start CRV, you actually put your pen on the left side of the paper. And the reason we do the left side is because the right brain corresponds left side of your body, etc.
Right.
So you're going to put all your psychic stuff on the left side, and all the naming stuff goes on the right, and any other notes and anything else that's going on in your head goes on the right. So you put all the administrative stuff and junk and garbage on the right, and any guesses you have or names or nouns you put on the right, and then just put descriptive words on the left. And this is a very brief overview of how you can kind of separate the true psychic stuff from the
Right.
garbage. Keep the descriptive stuff, anything that describes rather than identifies, and put that on the left. So you have a picture come up in your head, like I see a man on a horse. Just put that on the right because that's naming, right?
Mhm.
But then you say, oh, I see something red. We'll put the red on the left because that's describing. So that's just a very brief, because I know we're almost out of time, but that's a very brief way to access the psychic part of your brain, is
As
to do
you're
it that way.
talking about that, I did have some things. Hopefully, they'll be quick questions. So I'm left-handed, right? And so as I'm writing, it would be easier for it to be like on the left side for me because I'm left-handed, which means I naturally use the right side of my brain. Do you find that more of the people that you do these courses with, like the with their left-handed or right-handed, that it differentiates?
No, I get that
No?
question all the time. They've actually done studies on it, and they haven't found any correlation between increased psychic ability and left-handedness. I'm very right-handed, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's yeah, they haven't they've done a ton of studies. They haven't been able to find any correlation on it.
And then my other question is, you mentioned that when you're doing this, maybe someone's thinking about the dog or the gas or whatever. How do you handle distractions or mental blocks that come in while you're remote viewing?
We set them aside with that set aside process.
Okay, and so you just have that set aside process, and then they should be able to go right into it.
Yeah, and and you write it on the right side of the page, and sometimes, of course, like any discipline, that's the hardest part to get over in the beginning, is the
Right.
constant thought of it's an apple, and you think, what if it's not an apple? But I think it's an apple, and you keep thinking that it's an apple, and you might even
Right.
say, oh, it's sweet and juicy when it's a fire engine, right? So you're
Right.
going to have some incorrect perceptions, especially in the beginning, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is what we teach you a written structure and we teach you to focus on the structure because that gives your left brain something to do because your left brain wants to be in charge. So there becomes a tug of war in the beginning between
Mhm.
allowing your psychic side to have a voice, which comes from the subconscious mind,
Mhm.
and having your left brain. But no, I'm in charge of this. So so the process itself is designed to honor both sides and teach them to get along and how to work together in tandem rather than fighting each other.
Yeah.
So
I
that's a
I
key.
I really appreciate you going through all of this with me today. I appreciate you doing this interview. I know my audience is going to love you. Hopefully lots of them will go sign up for the free class.
I hope
Can
so.
you can you tell them where they can find information from you, or if they wanted to contact you, how they'd be able to do that?
But the website is intuitivespecialist.com. So if you can't remember all that, or if you can't see it from here,
Nope, we'll
it's
put it up there.
intuitivespecialist.com. Okay, great. So it's intuitivespecialist.com. And when you're on the website for a few seconds, then this banner pops up that says free masterclass. But you can
Mm,
also see it at the top of the website. It says free masterclass. So that's there. The free masterclass is there, and it's a fun class. I think you'll really enjoy it. I was really good friends with Mel Riley, and he was the very first soldier they put in the military unit when they decided to create an applications arm of this because he was very
mhm.
naturally psychic, and he and I became such good friends. He was my best friend. He passed away in 2020. But he used to say, "You know what? You're gonna become known for being the fun remote viewing teacher." And I love that because for no one thing, I think the subconscious mind works and performs better when it's having a good time.
Yeah,
Instead of drudgery, it's gotta be fun. So
right,
fun is a really big part of what I do, even though the world can seem really serious right now and it can seem scary and there's negative stuff. If we keep things fun and light, then when there really something is really important, like a missing child or something, that then it will perform because you've run it through the paces in a fun way and it's developed and want to learn to play and just have a good time. Then when push comes to shove and we really need a serious answer, it really is right there ready to perform and do the right thing.
right. Well, Lori, I thank you so much. You're amazing. I hope that my family gets as much enjoyment out of, first of all, the free class as I did. I might actually go take it again. And I think I might definitely be enrolling in some of the higher level ones. So
I would love that.
um, I look forward to more conversations with you in the future. I thank you so much for being here with us today. To my
Thank you so
family,
much, Christina.
oh, no problem. To my family, I want to remind you, as we do at the end of every show, that nothing happens to you, it happens for you, and always lead with love. I hope all of y'all have a blessed and beautiful evening.